up, gamers? I'm Jason.
I'm Julie.
And today on Dice and Dragons, we are going to be doing something a little different. For those of you that have been following the channel for a while, you may have noticed that we do enjoy our licensed games. We have some of our favorite franchises, and when they are turned into board games, well, we just have to pick them up and play them. Now, do we always enjoy said licensed games?
No, we do not. We enjoy playing good games, and we could play them a lot.
Yes, especially when they have a license that we enjoy. So we wanted to talk to you today about what makes a great licensed game. And Julie, how are we going to be doing that? What are the 3 questions that we'll be asking and answering?
Well, we'll talk about what we believe should come first, source material or the game. And then we're going to talk about the importance of knowing said source material. And lastly, we're going to talk about, I can't remember. Jason, help me out.
Yes, how you adapt that license into the game. Now, it's going to be really important for the first part. We're going to be talking the source material license and the game because what comes first, the chicken and the egg. And for fans of video games, you've heard some horror stories and some of them have been released and you've unfortunately played them just like me. Now, I do want to give a little bit of an explanation as to why we are going to be discussing this and how this is going to be some new content for the channel. But for those of you that are just interested in the topic, take a look down below in the video description. There are timestamps. You can skip right on ahead. But for our regular viewers, we just want to let you know what's going on. Now, we have received a lot of requests to play some Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. For those of you that have been following us, you know we do have a precocious little man in the house who's a lot of fun. But that really stops us from getting those long campaign games to the table, which has been something that we really enjoy playing. I mean, how many of those have we reviewed on the channel, Julie?
A lot. I can't even... A lot.
Yeah, so it's one of our staples, and we haven't been able to do that as much as we would like. So these discussion videos let us do something a little different. You get to learn a little bit more about us, Dice and Dragons, what we think about different things. And we thought it would be a great way for us to also make some time to get things like Jaws of the Lion played. So there you have it. We've explained what we're going to be doing. Now, just to keep with our tradition, what time is it, Julie?
It's time to grab our drinks.
Yeah, we're going to grab our drinks, grab our best friend. We're going to catch our breath.
And we'll be right back with our first question.
Yeah, our first question. It's going to be an interesting one. By the way, this is totally unscripted, so who knows how this is going to go. So, Julie, what do you think is more important? Getting that license for your source material or actually having a game idea?
I think that sorry, let's start over.
3, 2, 1. So, Julie, what do you think is most important? Having that license to then start building your game around for that source material that you love, or actually having a game that may fit with your source material?
I think, generally speaking, you have to have a game before you try to apply source material to it.
And I definitely agree. There's been some horror stories of people getting the license and trying to then make a game. Now, that doesn't go for just board games. It also applies to video games, which have a lot more terrible, horrifying stories than board games.
I would kind of liken it to, that's that pretty girl or that handsome guy. Something looks really good. It's on the outside. But then when you sit down and go on a date with them, you're like, there is nothing to this person. There's nothing. Same thing with a game. I mean, you pick it up, you're all excited because it's one of your favorite IPs, and then you start playing it and you're like, what were they thinking?
So like the Umbrella Academy game where literally the board was smaller than it should have been. So at this point, I will have to say sometimes, at least in board games, size does matter. Having stuff not on the board was really freaking annoying. Not to mention the gameplay.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with the IP, though. I think more.
No, but it's going to show you. I think they got the license. I don't think they had a game.
Yeah, I think that's just bad game design. You have lots of bad game design not related to IP. I think the other thing is that it didn't really, to me, translate all that much to the Umbrella Academy. It did in some regards, but it wasn't. I think they were really just trying to get it out. Now, I would say you have the opposite that's true. I think basically the game should be a great game whether or not it's got the IP to it. I'm going to give the example that Jason brings up often, and I think I've brought it up too. Power Rangers, to me, I couldn't care less that it's a Power Rangers game. I'm not a fan. I don't know any. I know a little bit. I don't know much about the franchise, but the game is fun, so I enjoy playing it. There are other games. I mean, we pulled out. I'll give you the opposite. I love the X-Files. Love them. Jason got me a game, and it's not the most solid of games.
No, it's the X-Files game by IDW Games, which is currently out of print. We have yet to try it with the expansion. And I gotta say, the game does a very good job of capturing the theme of the X-Files. So it feels like an X-Files game, but there are definitely some wonky mechanics and things that don't quite hold up. For example, Julie was the smoking man, and she proceeded to beat us by just drawing some cases that we literally couldn't solve. It was like, really hard case, really hard case, really hard case. And at that point in the game, once all three of them were out there, we shouldn't even bother trying. It was pretty much like
It is thematic, though. That was what the smoking man did, is he made things really complicated for Mulder and Scully. But, you know, it is what it is. So, I mean, you can reverse engineer, I think. I think if you are an excellent game designer, I think what you have to have, though, is a general idea of how something could be applied. I think game designers get into trouble when they obtain a license and they say, okay, let's develop a game for this now. So unless you have a phenomenally talented game designer who also knows the source material, and that's the next thing that we're going to get to, yeah. I think that then that might be possible. But I think it's hard to reverse engineer.
No, and I agree with Julie just in general. And I'm going to talk...
You agree with me in general?
Yeah,
woohoo! You heard it here first.
Yes, in terms of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about video games. The development cycle is well known with what happens oftentimes with licensed games. And it can be the same thing with regards to licensed board games. Is that when you get a license, you have to go through an approval process. And that can be very, very complicated. And sometimes you're getting the license because this thing is coming out, it's a new TV show, or it's a sequel, it's an idea, and you don't even have the bare bones of a game. But the approval process can completely bog you down. And a perfect example of this right now is the Street Fighter miniatures board game, which was delayed by almost 2 years on Kickstarter. A lot of it just from the back and forth with Capcom. And there's people working with, well, it's kind of funny, it's a video game adapted to a board game. There are people actually working with Konami as well that have had some issues with the back and forth. And it can really delay some stuff. I mean, I got the chance to check out a playtest of the Contra game, which was pretty cool. I'm eagerly awaiting to get the game to the table, but I know the back and forth with Konami has not always been the easiest, but they've been very supportive of Blacklist games. So you really got to keep that in mind, that there's a lot of intricacies that can come with a license. However, and this is, I learned this from the Secret Cabal, and we've got a great example back here. You can't see it behind me. It's the Expanse board game. Now, Jeff Engelstein got the opportunity to make an Expanse game, and this was something that was offered to him. And he was already working on a game design, and he said, you know what? This design, actually, that I'm already playing with, will work with the Expanse. And what did you get? You got a great game that feels like the Expanse. The game is incredibly well designed. Now, it wasn't my favorite game at 2 players, but the Expanse, if you're a fan of the IP, it's not all about 1 versus 1, Earth versus Mars. You've got to have the OPA and Protogen in there as well. Otherwise, you're only playing part of the game. Well, part of the IP. So that was just really cool how that worked out. And one of our favorites, actually, and this goes to the idea of also potentially maybe even having the game or game system that you can plug something in as well, is Star Wars Imperial Assault. And Fantasy Flight Games had the license, they had Descent, and they literally just said, why don't we make a Star Wars version of Descent? let's tweak the rules a little bit and the way things work. And they came out with a great game. So that is always something that you can do. Now, it can also very much work to the detriment. I mean, how many versions of Monopoly are there out there? A lot of them aren't very different, but I got to give Hasbro credit. They've been trying to do some different things with some skin versions of Monopoly. You also look at Talisman. You can get some really cool versions of Talisman as well. The Op Games just released Star Wars Talisman. We actually have Kingdom Hearts Talisman, which from what I know of the video game, works very well in the Talisman setting.
There's the Rising games.
Yes, there's the Rising games, but those actually were their own system originally. And you actually brought up a great point though, because this is it's very different. So the Op developed Thanos Rising, Avengers Infinity War. We really like that one. They've done some good jobs adapting it to Harry Potter and the Dark Knight, the Batman Who Laughs Rising is the other one that we have. But we also have the Star Wars one. And the Star Wars one almost feels too much like a clone of Thanos, and it is actually our least favorite. It was interesting to see how they took their own system and did more design work to really take those other IPs that they have and create some cool games. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go about designing a game. I do agree with, like I said earlier, I think that the game or an idea as to how you're going to be playing the game needs to come first. Otherwise, you can find yourself on the track where basically you get a license and someone can say, hey, 6 months from now, you need to be releasing a game. You're going to be scrambling, you're going to be working hard, and you're trying to meet a release date. You're not actually going to be making a good game. And I feel that the Umbrella Academy by Studio 71 Games that's exactly what happened. They got the license, they had a release date, and they just got the game out. And they just had no choice in the matter. I don't know. Hopefully that
what
really
about
wasn't
Scott
the case.
Pilgrim? We didn't love that game either.
Yeah, that is another great example, but I think they had a clear idea about the game. I liked a lot of the elements of the game, and they really captured the flavor of Scott Pilgrim. Like, that was fantastic. And the idea of doing button mash combos. But the problem with that was I felt they put it in a deck builder. So you ended up with a deck builder with 3 resources and dual-sided cards where you have to button mash. Like, there was just so much going on your cards. It just felt incredibly cluttered.
I think like,
but that was the design. But I really think they had an idea for a Scott Pilgrim game. I do think they maybe had to release it by a certain time, because I feel like more playtesting would have eventually had someone say, hey, you've got to get rid of some of these resource elements.
This all comes back down to saying you have to have a good game. And then I think there's other things that come into it, but I think generally speaking, you need to have the game first. And maybe that would be a good segment to our next topic.
Yeah, no, I've got to agree with you. So there you have it. What do we think? Our final summary, in case someone's been, scrolling ahead to the end of this. We think that you need to have the game before you have the license, or at least a general idea as to what you want to do with the license to turn it into the game. If you just go after the license first, it's going to set you up for failure potentially. And the track record that I've seen, at least, that's been quite clear. It's not as clear in board games. There's not enough research and news articles. But if you look at video games, that's been really the problem. You get the license, run out of time, you get a crap game. Aliens, Colonial Marines, I'm looking at you. All right, we are now moving on to our second topic, which is discussing the importance of the source material and your knowledge of it. So, Julie, how knowledgeable do you need to be about the source material?
I think it depends on how complex the game is, but I think you have to be pretty knowledgeable. Especially if you really want it to really feel like the game. I'd say, I give an example. We just talked about the Rising games. Those ones are a little bit, I think you don't need to know it quite as well. I think you can adapt it fairly easily. But other games, if you're really trying to give the feel of the IP, I think you need to know it very well.
I want to just interject here quickly, but we were just discussing the Rising games. Which one is your favorite?
I think the Harry Potter, because it feels the most thematic.
Exactly. And now I just want to get to that. It's very easy to adapt, but the best one is Harry Potter, and I agree, specifically because of the way you have to interact with Lord Voldemort. And also the starting characters feel a little bit more unique. You have a larger choice. And when you're taking it out of really feels like you're in the world of Harry Potter. They did a great job with Thanos Rising, but that definitely is my favorite by far.
Well, I'm going to give another example that they did it well, in my opinion, is the Legendary games. Like the Legendary games, I find, at least like the X-Files one, each of the characters does things that is very representative of what they do in the show, and they have the power. Same thing with the Marvel Legendary. I feel like they did that well too. Marvel Champions is another great example. I feel like they really take the different elements of that IP, and it really feels thematic. And I think that's what makes it really successful. If you just slap on the imagery to a game, I don't think it comes across. It's not as fun. I mean, the game can be fun, and then you basically what you're saying is, yeah, it's a skin version of this game, but it's not necessarily feel like you're in the world of it.
So you brought up a very good point. So I'm going to ask you a question. What is your favorite dungeon crawl that we have?
Descent.
And what is no that's perfect. You that's exactly the answer I was expecting. What is and it's not necessarily a dungeon crawl exactly. What's the dungeon crawl game that we have spent the most time playing?
Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. And why have we spent more time in the world of Lord of the Rings than Descent?
Well, it's a story driven, and we like the IP.
And I have to agree with Julie. Lord of the Rings with the IP and Fantasy Flight Games has learned a lot from all the different Lord of the Rings games they've done over the years, and they've really got a great grasp around the IP, all the elements from the books. When you're playing Journeys in Middle-earth, you feel like you are in Middle-earth, and you're adventuring, you're exploring. It's taking, about a good 40 to 50 hour romp through, well, maybe 30-hour romp through Middle-earth when you're playing Journeys. And as much as we love Descent, and I much prefer the combat in Descent,
it's just so long now since we played. I think I just hold it up there on a pedestal based on what I remember without it necessarily. I don't know if I'm afraid to play it again. Am I going to like it as much as I remember?
Yes, but in any case, that IP and that story and the fact that they've managed to capture a story that feels like you're in Tolkien's world, even though it's not written by him, is just a lot of fun. And whereas Descent has got a cool interconnecting story, a lot of it's more about powering up your characters, having fun, and going on a dungeon crawl and smashing monsters. So that just goes to show you the strength of the IP when you know it really well.
I'll give another example. 5 Minute Marvel. It's cool. I don't feel like I'm in the world of Marvel.
No, it's got the theme feels a little bit pasted on. The decks do feel thematic to the characters, though, so I will give them.
But I'm not immersed in the world of it.
No.
It doesn't feel like I'm one of the characters,
I prefer 5 Minute Dungeon to 5 Minute Marvel.
I do. Agree.
So that's a great example of taking theme where you had the opportunity to do it and you made an okay game. Like there's nothing wrong with 5 Minute Marvel. If you're a huge Marvel fan, you might enjoy that more than Dungeons if you just hate fantasy. But the fantasy game definitely feels more thematic, more fun because it was designed from the ground up. And that's one of the things when you've got your IP, you may know a lot about your IP, but you might not even be able to get it through in your game. So maybe that source material, and even though you know it very well, it might be an actual detriment. You might be better off just making up your own. And
I think if you are a huge fan of an intellectual property, you could come up with an idea of a game. So, when we were talking about before, does the game have to come first? I think if you know your source material very well and you develop games, because I can love source material. I'm not going to be coming up with a game anytime soon. You can do it backwards. But I think that to be able to do that, you need to know and live and breathe that IP.
Yeah, I think so. But you don't need to live and breathe all of that IP. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about next in the way that you can adapt games. If you're going to be making this big, expansive game with lots of expansion, then yes, live and breathe, know everything about the IP because it's going to be very important for the longevity and health of your game. If you're just trying to make a one-off game, then as Julie says, the more you know about the IP and that section that you're trying to turn into the game is going to be what is the most important. And the game needs to be great no matter what. And any game that's great, whether it's got an IP or not, you should actually do very well with. But I I think we've really talked a lot about it. You've taken the lead on this one, and I'm just going to agree with you. Knowing your source material is very important because you also need to know your target audience. And that's going to come into play when we talk about the third step, which is adaptation. Like, what aspect of the IP are you going to be adapting? What do you want to present? Because the only way you're going to be able to do that well is by knowing your source material and hitting your target audience. A game that I felt that they really knew their source material was Bloodborne, the board game, even though that wasn't really a hit for us. And we'll talk about that when we get to the adaptation phase. And you look at Star Wars Imperial Assault, and actually, here's an interesting point that I want to bring up with knowing the IP and also knowing your target audience. So Fantasy Flight Games has made the decision to switch from Imperial Assault to go to the miniatures game, which is Star Wars Legion. And talking to a couple of game store owners, everyone has said to me that they might have made a miss because everyone was loving the Imperial Assault, like story-driven campaign. And the people that wanted to play the tactical miniature style, they had that in the box as well, which is a great thing about Imperial Assault. Now they've moved over to a miniatures game, whereas you do have a lot of the Star Wars source material. You've gone ahead and you've picked a fight with some really big name players in the industry. Now, Julie might know the names because I've talked about them, but you're going up against, Games Workshop and Warhammer 40K. So you're going up against a juggernaut with Star Wars, which is a great IP, but you had a lot of people that were like, well, if I want to skirmish, I can skirmish, but I also get to play with my wife who likes to be a Wookiee and go, I can't do it. I can't do the Wookiee thing. I can't do it. Sorry, Sammy G isn't here. And it's really important to know your IP. Actually, you know what? One last thing I wanted to talk about, just to give an idea of how knowing the IP can really make a game better. We reviewed 2 Back to the Future games on this channel. We reviewed Back in Time and Dice Through Time. And both of them capture the spirit of Back to the Future, but which one do you like better and which one do you think is the better Back to the Future game?
That's not fair because I don't remember titles of games.
So, Back in Time, when we get the clock tower and we're moving around, fighting Biff. Dice Through Time is when we're in the DeLorean and going on the different timelines, trying to stop the...
The one with the tower is the one I like the most.
Yeah. So, to summarize, Back in Time is the perfect representation of the original Back to the Future movie was. Dice Through Time takes themes from all 3 movies and gives you a DeLorean and you're moving through time trying to stop the space-time continuum from, collapsing. And Back in Time feels like Back to the Future. I like the ideas in both games, but if I had to pick one, I'd pick Back in Time over Dice Through Time. It's just so much more Back to the Future because it has such love for the original movie that you're there. You're Marty, you're Doc, and you're trying to save the day. Now, there's a little bit of a downside of having that love for the source material. It's a 4-player game, and Jennifer and Einstein do not feel nearly as good as Marty and Doc. So, once again, just showing how IP
That's
isn't
a
the best.
whole other topic of, what makes a good 2-player game versus other counts.
4-player games, no, exactly. And that's something that we will get to eventually in a discussion topic. But I think we've covered enough about source material. Let's move on. And we're going to talk about adapting that source material to your game. So, Julie, how do you adapt your source material into your game mechanics? Now, neither of us are game designers here, so we're coming at this from a reviewer's perspective, having played a lot of licensed games where some games just don't feel like they're licensed properly at all.
Well, and the last thing you finished off with was Back to the Future, which you gave the example of, a lot of material or a little bit. And it really, I think it's really important to take the game into consideration. You talked about it a little bit as well when you talk about the size of the game. Marvel Champion is a game with multiple expansions, right? You need to know your material and you need to go get stuff from everywhere. Let's say Harry Potter is another great example where you're taking the whole story. And you need to have the whole story because you're talking, the game is all of the...
Well, actually, I'm going to disagree with you on that point because with Harry Potter, at least with the games that we've played, they've actually been a lot smaller in scale, and I think that's been to their success, except for Hogwarts Battle. So
that's what I'm talking about, Hogwarts Battle.
Specifically Hogwarts Battle. No, yeah. So that's a good point. But they've also been able to sort of slim it down, whereas Death Eaters Rising, I would say, focuses more like books 5, 6, and 7 in terms of the content that you're getting. And then if you're looking at the House Cup competition, it's really focusing on just book 1 and the idea of competing for that House Cup.
Yeah, well, and that's what it is. It's a House Cup. So I think you have to be careful not to be too general, like we're talking about 5-Minute Marvel, where you're kind of just slapping it on. You
Painting it.
Yeah, if you're going to do something that's not well adapted, like in the sense that you're not taking the time to really give all the detail that you should give, that's when you're going to have a problem. But if you can take, like you were just talking about with the Back to the Future game, focus on just one thing and do it well. But if you're going to make a large scale game, then make sure that you've got all of
I you know what? We're really agreeing on most of the stuff, and I guess that's because we've played a lot of these games together, so we think alike. We often talk about the issues that we have with the games afterwards, and I'll talk about Power Rangers, like being the Power Rangers fan. So I understand how they are adapting the game, adapting the characters to the game. And so far, with everything that we've played, it feels incredibly thematic. It's a lot of fun, and the focus in the game has really been get the character, make them fun to play, and capture the spirit of the show in everything that is going on. And the different seasons feel a little different. You can do some crazy mashups, which is some of the things that fans always dream about or talk about doing. They've really done a great job with it. And Marvel Champions is another great example. And that game's going to be going on for a long time. But every pack we've gotten has felt different.
What about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle?
I was actually going to talk about that. So that is actually very interesting the way that one worked, because it was designed first by Kevin Wilson as a one versus many game, and then that just didn't do well. And a little bit of a side topic, but I'll mention it anyway. One versus many is hard to sell when the villains aren't that cool. So TMNT has some cool villains, but I'm not sure how many people love the villains. So that led to them creating what is known as the Universal Adventure Game System, like the UAGS. And unfortunately, we're not going to be getting any more iterations on that, but we currently have TMNT, and they did a really good job adapting. And I got to give IDW full credit for it. I almost didn't back it. We've had a lot of fun playing the game. The Turtles feel like the Turtles. We got even a few different versions of the Turtles, which is pretty cool. I've really enjoyed playing Lona Raph and some of his strengths as well. And that's adapting the IDW comic book storyline. And one of the genius things that IDW did is they gave you the digital comics for free for all of the storylines that were adapted. And I was just blown away. Like, it feels like you're playing the issues, the main storylines in the comics. It's fantastic. There's supposed to be a couple more expansions coming out to really sort of flesh it out to that end point. Not sure if they're going to be coming out, but they now also have Batman the Animated Series coming out. And I got a chance to play that with a friend on Tabletop Simulator. And that was really cool because it felt like Batman. So they did a really great job of creating a system that at its core could easily be fit for different types of games. We were supposed to get an Avatar game, and I've been trying to get Julie into Avatar, and I figured, well, hey, if the game's coming out, maybe she'll want to see the source material, but now we don't know if the game is going to be coming out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is it comes back again to how well designed your game is and how well adapted the license is, because trying to put too big a license on too simple a game can come off really badly. It can come off really well if you're doing it well. So again, you have to know the source material, you have to know your market. So I think it's really a combination of the three things we were just talking about personally.
I also think that, as you mentioned, smaller can be a lot better. A great example is we've played both Cowboy Bebop board games. We played Board Game Boogie and we played Space Serenade. Now, I originally thought that semi-co-op Space Serenade was not going to be what we'd like. I thought that should be a co-op game because that was more in line with Bebop, but actually rewatching the stuff, seeing Faye and Spike, kind of step on each other's toes to get the same bounty, it's semi-co-op does work. And that game focused primarily on the bounty hunting, and then it's like, well, then you got to defeat Vicious because he's the big bad. Well, that isn't necessarily the best adaptation of the source material. It was a lot of fun. And it's a game that really surprised you.
I didn't think I was going to enjoy it, and I did.
And then we played Cowboy Bebop Board Game Boogie, which literally is probably one of the best adaptations I've ever seen. That is the show, all elements of the show turned into a board game. And I gotta say, 5 or 10 years ago, I would have loved it, not because of the mechanics or because of the mechanics, but it feels dated. Like it just wasn't nearly as fun as Space Serenade. What we were doing wasn't nearly as engaging, despite it being probably the best adaptation of Cowboy Bebop that we're ever going to see, unless they do some kind of really deep co-op dungeon crawl or where you got to go through every single episode of the show.
X-Files dungeon crawl. Oh.
They don't really fight the monsters though, unfortunately. You could do an X-Files investigation game, so take something like X-Files Chronicles of Crime.
Well, no, but they do get better. Oh, I'm going on a tangent. We said we weren't game developers, but the point is, I don't think we've ever had a game there's no real X-Files game where you have all of the little elements of the several seasons of X-Files, and that's okay. There are still versions of the game out there that feel like you're in the world of X-Files, so that's fun.
So there you have it. I think we've really covered everything that we wanted to say about adapting your games and how important it is. You really got to know your source material, and you got to know the game and what you're trying. Oh, wait, sorry. There was one thing I wanted to mention, but I'll tie it into our nice summary here. You really got to know who you're trying to adapt it for and what aspect. You could take a TV show, take the best episode of the TV show and turn it into a highly replayable game that you can play again and again. You can go expansive but try to get into a small box like Cowboy Bebop, and it may or may not work. Or you can go the route where you're like, you know what, I'm going to focus on this one aspect right now. I'm going to get it right, and then I'm going to keep expanding it. And you really want to know your source material to get the right target audience, because there's always a choice. Are you making a game based on the IP for all board gamers, or are you making a board game based on IP that's going to go after maybe the video gamer that likes this game and bring it into the market? And that's where we can talk a little bit about Bloodborne, because I felt that they adapted a lot of the video game mechanics and brought it to the table. And a lot of Bloodborne, the video game players also backed the board game, and they've been loving it. Whereas for us, I felt a lot of those video game mechanics were frustrating, they were annoying, and frankly, if I wanted to have respawns and timers on certain boss things, I'd be playing a video game. I didn't want to have that in my board game. I thought the world of Bloodborne was really cool, and the hunters looked awesome, and I wanted to play a Bloodborne board game, but just not the really challenging puzzly game that we got, and challenging in terms of randomness, like tile placement. That's a whole other story. You can watch our review.
I just gotta say, I have a little bit of a different take from the way I'm understanding what you're saying, because to me, the best adaptations are going to appeal to the people who love the IP, as well as the board gamer who's going to like the game, love the game for the board game. Like I was saying, not that I love Power Rangers, but like the example I gave with Power Rangers, I couldn't care less that it's a Power Ranger game. It could be any game, but I enjoy the way the game plays. Same thing with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I
agree with you. A great adaptation is going to work on all levels, but sometimes you want to make a choice, and that's going to be really about the IP itself. I mean, if you're adapting an IP that's fairly gruesome for whatever reason, like Friday the 13th, you're immediately going to be adapting it for the horror gamer. Now, you could try to lighten it up to appeal to everyone. I'm going to use Bloodborne, the board game, as an example. Is that game, like Dark Souls, the video games are brutally hard, and you're supposed to die and restart and replay. That is an aspect of the game. So they really took that video game and put it on the table. I'd have liked to see something that was a little bit more board game friendly like you would have, but that's not necessarily what you want to do, especially if you're taking it the route of Kickstarter or retail, which is a whole other conversation, which we're not quite ready for, but we'll potentially have that in the future. But in general, I agree. Great adaptation is going to hit on all levels and people are going to enjoy. And I love the fact you brought up Power Rangers again. I just remember listening to the Shut Up and Sit Down podcast where they were just mentioning when they played the game and they were like, Power Rangers is lame. They kind of thought that way. And then by playing the game and having fun with it, it brought them back to when they were kids, when they thought Power Rangers was cool. So they were thinking about it from the perspective as they've now grown out of Power Rangers, but coming back into it and playing a fun game, they're like, I remember this was a lot of fun and Power Rangers was really neat for a couple of years when I was younger. So that's the magic of board games, I think, and the magic of a great adaptation. It can bring you back to those really fun moments. And there we have it. We've covered everything that we wanted to talk about in terms of making a great licensed game. So, Julie, a summary. What do you need to do to make a great licensed board game?
I thought I just said it. You have to know your source material. You have to develop a game that represents that well, but that also translate into a great board game.
And ideally, you've got the game idea or some design work done first, meaning if you don't get the license, you can still put out a great game. But for those of you that really want to challenge, well, you can always get the license and try to do it, but you're in for a rocky road potentially.
So on that note, it's time to remind you to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell to be notified when we have some new content for you.
And take a look down below in the video description. You'll find links to all of our social media feeds, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you'd like to see pictures of Julie and I playing a lot of these licensed games, they're all over those feeds. For those of you that listen to the full intro, if you want to see pictures of us playing Jaws of the Lion, that should be coming up soon. So keep an eye on those feeds as well. And if you happen to be looking to pick up a copy of any of the games that we talked about, take a look at our link that we have as well to multizone.ca. It'll give you 10% off your next purchase. And the great thing about that is you will be supporting the channel as a portion of that purchase will be coming back to us.
And then popping up in front of Jason will be a link to our most recent video. And in front of me, let's go to our top 10.
Our top 10, well, since this discussion topic makes sense,
I'll
take you back to our top 10 games of all time. And it will be forthcoming. We will have a top 10 IP games list coming, so that will replace it when we get to that point. So now what do we need to do?
Grab our drinks.
Grab our best friend.
And we got to keep playing games.
Keep playing games.
And most likely more IP games.
Yes, we've got Robotech Invid Invasion coming.
How many Robotech games? Jeez.
4.